Between the budget battle, funding the infrastructure bill, and an ambitious tax proposal, tens of billions of dollars in the agricultural economy hangs in the balance as legislators in Washington wrangle over signature pieces of President Joe Biden's domestic policy agenda. Welcome to Feedstuffs in Focus, our podcast taking a deeper look at big issues in the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries. I'm your host, Andy Vance. Thanks for joining us. In this episode, we'll hear from an agricultural policy expert, a member of the banking community, and one member of the House Agriculture Committee about the various issues and concerns at play specific to the food and natural resources industry. This episode is sponsored by Arm & Hammer Animal and Food Production and their science-hearted podcast, Food Chain Chats. Join me in a new episode. We'll talk with Dr. Tom Rehberger, Director of Innovation and Product Development at Arm & Hammer. We'll discuss optimal rumen function and the role that products like Certillus can have on ultimate success. You can subscribe and listen to Food Chain Chats wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Well, as I mentioned, a lot is going on in Washington this week, with tens of billions of dollars hanging in the balance as lawmakers on Capitol Hill fight over the size, scope, and timing of key bills to keep the government funded and to expand the size of federal programs. Fights between the parties and among different wings of the Democratic caucus stand in the way of a $65 billion investment for rural broadband, $10 billion for agricultural disaster relief, and many more billions for roads, bridges, ports, pipes, waterways, and so on. American Farm Bureau Federation's Emily Buckman says the first problem is getting the Senate to pass the House-sponsored stopgap with the disaster aid to avert an October 1st government shutdown and a possible default on U.S. credit.
It's hard to tell at this point what Congress will do, but we do believe that everyone should come together and get a bill across the finish line that'll get us beyond that September 30th point.
Senate Republicans vow to provide no votes for the bill in a bid to deprive Democrats of the funding for their $3.5 trillion tax and spending bill, expanding government with tax hikes that Farm Bureau says will hit farmers hard. But the fight over the Biden Build Back Better agenda is tied to the $1 trillion plus bipartisan Senate-passed infrastructure bill that Farm Bureau backs. But the bill has divided House moderates and liberals. The liberal wing of the Democratic caucus vows to oppose the road, bridge, and broadband bill if it's voted next week before the much larger bill, as leadership has promised. As Buckman explains,
it sounds like it will get delayed, according to reports. And as far as President Biden's other piece of legislation that he's trying to get to the finish line, there's a lot in that process, and there's still a lot left to do to get that piece of legislation pieced together.
Including opposition by key Senate and some House moderates to the tax bill. Now, could the fight over the bigger bill imperil the infrastructure measure?
It's a possibility. It is a possibility. There were some promises made,
including promises by Speaker Pelosi to the moderate wing of her party for a vote by Monday, raising the specter of her losing the votes needed to pass the president's and the party's sweeping agenda if she reneges on that promise. Now, one concern as Congress works on that $3.5 trillion infrastructure package is how the package is funded. Inside that bill is a requirement that farmers, ranchers, and the public at large might want to be aware of. Paul Mursky, Executive Vice President of Congressional Relations and Strategy for the Independent Community Bankers of America, says his group is seriously concerned about a proposal that potentially involves the IRS and your bank account.
As the Biden administration is looking to pay for this $3.5 trillion spending package, they're looking for ways to offset that cost. And one idea, which is a horrible idea, is to have the IRS look into everyone's bank account transaction. And it would force banks to report on any transaction going into or out of an account of $600 or more. So basically, every account in America would be monitored by the IRS as the banks are forced to send in your transaction account information into the IRS.
Mursky says that the proposal could help generate money to pay for the spending.
What that means is the IRS is assuming everyone is a tax cheat and will start auditing more and more people. As you get that bank account data, it's going to be very challenging for the IRS to even sort through that or even figure out what's going on in all these various accounts. We're talking checking accounts, savings accounts, business accounts, your loans, any cash transactions, any international transactions. It would be like the IRS trying to find a needle in the haystack. It's crazy. They pretend that they're going after wealthy millionaires and billionaires. Our question is, why then do they need everyone's account transactions sent to the IRS?
The independent bankers handle a lot of business in rural America, of course, and Mirsky says this will have a huge impact on farmers, ranchers, and rural businesses in general.
We're really concerned that customers realize and know that banks are going to be soon forced to report all your financial transactions, even on loans, to the IRS. We feel that customers don't know what's going on here in Washington with this proposal. We want to make sure that customers know it's not the bank sending all this information to the IRS. It's the IRS and Treasury and the administration demanding that the banks report all these transactions. So we want to make sure that the typical American small business owner, farmer, rancher, they understand what's going on in Washington, and really to weigh in. If this is something that concerns you as it concerns our community bankers, you should really contact your congressmen and your senators.
In the big picture, the Independent Community Bankers Association says the proposal overall is simply overkill.
This is a dragnet. This is the IRS looking to profile individuals based on their account transaction. It's basically a stop and frisk of average Americans, and I think it's going to trigger a lot of false audits and cause a lot of cost and compliance burden for not only the banks, but for average Americans as well.
Mirsky says that only 16% of IRS audits end with the taxpayer owing money, which makes this a very expensive proposal in the long run. Now, separate from the funding plan, there are some concerns about, how this bill is funded. The Republican leader of the House Agriculture Committee, Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania, is urging Democrats and all of rural America to join in his call for changes to the president's tax plan. Congressman Thompson said a recent study from Texas A&M found that on average it would have a devastating impact, in his words, on family farms and ranches.
What was telling within that study was the 2% of the farms that did not see a significant increase in taxes, and that basically is what it would cost to buy your family farm and ranch back from the federal government. But the 2% of the farms that did not, they didn't own any land. They leased and rented all their land.
Thompson says that those who own the land will continue to struggle under this proposal.
What we do know is it will increase taxes on farm families that we talked about. It's going to perpetuate labor shortage in rural America, and it's going to significantly raise our deficit across the board. Just farm families in rural communities deserve so much better than this.
And in the end, Thompson says the bill will impact everyone in some way.
Without a robust economy, people everywhere, including the cities, including on Pennsylvania Avenue, are probably going to wake up dark, cold, and hungry. And once you have food insecurity, the consequences of that are evident when you look around the world.
Representative Thompson says the hardworking men and women that feed, clothe, and power our nation will be irreparably harmed by these policies. As I mentioned, there's a lot going on in D.C. and a lot to watch, and we'll keep tabs on it and have our policy editor, Jackie Fatka, on in the coming weeks to wrangle through those different details as they come to light. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. Special thanks to our sponsor, Arm & Hammer Animal and Food Production, and their science-hearted podcast, Food Chain Chats. Subscribe to take a deep dive into important topics in animal and food production and food safety. Find us wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'm Andy Vance, and you've been listening to Feedstuffs in Focus. Thanks for joining us. If you want to hear more conversations about some of the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms, including Apple and Google, or visit our website, feedstuffs.com, for future episodes. Until next time, have a great day, and thanks for listening.